But again, we'll first open up with that dialogue and then finish with the Q&A. And so I'm going to pass this over to the chair of the School of Social Work, Dr. Karen Rice.
Thank you, Shana, and welcome everybody. I am Karen Rice. I'm the chair of the School of Social Work, and it is my pleasure to be able to introduce our moderator for today's session, Dr. Nasli Hardy. Dr. Hardy joined Millersville University in 2004. In addition to being a faculty in the Computer Science Department and chair of the Women in Science and Technology Conference, Dr. Hardy is the founder of Woman Empowered, which is an empowerment coaching program. Her teaching and research interests include network and information security, applications of logic and computer science education, and STEM education for underrepresented minorities. She is passionate about social justice and the empowerment of women and has written several opinion pieces for the Lancaster newspapers. Dr. Hardy is from Bangladesh and she grew up in Zimbabwe. She came to the United States as an undergraduate student and earned her undergraduate degree in chemical engineering from Clarkson University. Dr. Hardy also holds an MBA degree in media management from the Metropolitan College of New York and a PhD in computer science from the City University of New York. Despite her demanding career, Dr. Hardy maintains a strong work-life balance by prioritizing the family she has built with her husband, Dr. Chris Hardy, and their two children, Zuzu and Zavi. Dr. Hardy?
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dr. Rice and Ms. Shana Landis for organizing this event and for inviting the panelists and me. Dr. Rice, shall I go straight into the seminar, or shall I introduce each of the bios of each of our speakers? Can I just introduce? All right. Okay. Well, everyone, hello, everyone in the audience. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. I am delighted to participate with my dream technology panelists. They are experts for sure, but also my good friends, Charlie Reisinger, Steve Sharp, and Joel Walker. So our topic today is the empowering and disempowering presence of technology, especially during a pandemic that essentially shut down the physical social structure as we know it. And to make up for the breakdown of physical connections, we have learned to rely increasingly on technology. Technology that is persuasive and therefore also invasive. Technology that is connecting through one medium while also disconnecting us from another medium. Technology that is productive in some way and therefore unproductive in other ways. A technology that disseminates information and also disseminates misinformation. As a simple example, when consumers use social media, they feel they're in control of their message, of their connections, and who and what they follow. But that view is deceptive. You see, social media platforms use algorithms that are designed to keep consumers on their platforms for as long as possible. Let me reiterate. The algorithms are intentionally designed with the bias to feed you and me, the consumer, material that is most likely to keep us on that platform for as long as possible, whether or not the material is verified or incendiary, kind or cruel. In essence, technology platforms use algorithms biased for addiction to technology. Why is that? Well, in keeping us on their platforms, technology companies not only make advertising dollars, that is old news, they also gain a deep base of knowledge of our digital blueprint. What triggers us, what inspires us, and with that information, technology can be used to predict how we will behave. And to go a step further, technology can be used to influence our future behavior. The information that is being mined about us currently is valuable in ways we do not even know. But meanwhile, consumers of social media unwittingly become addicted and drawn into narrow tunnels that are hard to break from. So these are all daily examples of how the use of technology can be disempowering. At the same time, the use of technology is what has allowed an entire world to keep functioning during a pandemic. In 2020, when many industries were crippled, educators rose to the challenge and used technology to instruct students. Students rose to the challenge and used technology for classwork and for their social life, so much so that TikTok is now a part of our vernacular. Commercial industries were able to carry out essential functions as their employees mastered Zoom and remote login. Social justice and the lack of it became a highlight of the year as images and conversations streamed through in real time into our homes. And these are all daily examples of how the use of technology can be empowering. The disparity of the empowering and disempowering use of technology can only be reduced with the meaningful awareness of its users, the consumers, you and me, so that as users, we become informed and consciously smart in our use of technology. And that really is what we will be discussing today with our panelists. And our panelists today have a lot of insight. And so I'm just going to dive into the conversation. And my first question is to Steve Sharp. Steve, could you address the use of technology with respect to education and talk about the disparity with respect to access and infrastructure and need, especially in the time of a pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, what we understand is actually as of March 13th, 2020, when all of our schools were shut down by governor's orders, that the nature of education became more explicitly clear. We saw a strong disparity when it came to teacher training, courses being offered, post-secondary advisement, school counselor ratios, a strong disparity already present in our education system, but no more had that been present when we see after March 13th, when really access to schools and education was based more on zip code than anything alone. And so really we saw a wide disparity when students having access to devices, access to high-speed internet, and with that then access to education, support, and even other students from there. And the results are just profound. We understand with recent reports, including the New York Times, that the disparity in education, those education learning gaps based off of schools, continues to grow and has really grown over the past 11 months now. And that needs to give us a lot of pause and alarm. And when you talk about it again as ways to address it, we understand the first wave of COVID funding that came with the first CARES bill, most of that investment went into the educational infrastructure through technology grants. So we're going to see as we continue to go, how can we leverage that? How can we use technology to support our students' learning gaps, a growing mental health crisis that's also emerging, and then also how can we continue to recover education for our students?
So the gaps became even more apparent. The gaps that already existed were all the more highlighted because of 2020 and what the pandemic brought to us. Thank you, Steve. And my next question is to Charlie. Charlie, we know that technology is primarily organized around capitalistic and monetary gain, not ethics. Could you address the nature of these algorithms, how they're integrated into technology platforms, and in effect, how they shape the behavior of adults and students?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nasli. And something before I talk about algorithms, just to sort of add to what Steve had noted too, and I suspect we'll come back to this later. In terms of the disparities, is something that we noticed at Penn Manor immediately was an incredible disparity in our community with access to basic internet. That's an issue that we're continuing to work through. So even before we get to the effects of algorithms, I mean, there are still long-lasting issues that we have in our community with basic access. So hopefully we'll return to that later. To algorithms, though, wow, there is so much to unpack with algorithms. So I'll try to give a sort of a concise and maybe enlightening, hopefully entertaining overview of how algorithms work. It is a bit of a dark subject in some ways, so we'll try to lighten it up. So as Nasli indicated, the internet itself is organized around fiscal gain, right? So if you're a company on the internet, if you are a Facebook, you're a for-profit company, and your goal of a for-profit company is to maximize your cash intake to maximize your profits. So we know the predominant fiscal engine of the internet is the ad economy, right? That's how Facebook and Google, they make the majority of their profits. So if you're a company such as a Facebook, you're going to try to figure out how to maximize your profits. And the way to do that is through a super old business model, right? In the olden days, right, if you were a bakery, you wanted your customers to keep coming back daily for a coffee and a bagel, right? You wanted to maximize the attention your customers had on your bakery, right? You wanted them to come back every day. Fast forward to 2021, right? So what does that look like in an online environment? Well, algorithms are essentially computer code. It is the system of nudges that companies such as Facebook and YouTube use to keep our attention focused so that we keep coming back for the digital bagel and coffee every day, every hour, for some people every quarter hour, back to those platforms. And why again is that? Well, the more time that we spend on these platforms, the more ads that we're seeing, right? And that generates more revenue for the companies. So at its base, that whole system is some might call it neutral, right? Because the technology itself doesn't have an inherent bias in it. However, that being said, though, what has increasingly happened over the past 10 years is that companies have gotten better and better and better at optimizing these algorithms, these little code tricks, to, in essence, get us to cajole personal information to make their profile, their behavioral profile of us, more accurate, more multidimensional, so they can keep us on platforms longer, serve up better ads, and ultimately begin to nudge and shape our behavior. So here's a simple example of this, and I suspect that many of you have felt this. You've been on YouTube and you decided, hey, I want to look up cat videos, right? Who doesn't love cats? The internet needs more cats, right? So we go out looking for more cat videos. So we start looking for cat videos and we get a cute cat video. And now suddenly the autoplay and the auto suggestions start kicking in. They say, well, look, you like this cat video, here's more cats, right? Because we all need more cats. So they're keeping us on the platform. But what often happens with these algorithms, because we haven't baked equity, ethics, truth, right, into these algorithms, the machine is serving up more videos. So what tends to happen with these systems is they tend to push us further, they tend to guide us further along. So I start by seeing some cat videos, and next, what I may start seeing is videos that may suggest, hey, cats are better than dogs. I watch that video, I tell the system that I'm interested in a video telling me that cats are better than dogs. So the system, the algorithms, YouTube is going to feed us a new video. Maybe it's a video that says dogs are smelly, right? And it starts to guide and shape my behavior by what it puts in front of me, right? I click that video, I watch dogs are smelly, and now I get a video that says, hey, how can you trust those dogs? They play with mice, right? Or I'm sorry, how would you trust those dogs? They don't play with mice. You can't trust those dogs, right? The next video, look how those dogs wag their tail so fast, right? The next video, dogs are really horrible, aren't they? The next video, why don't we just go out and kill all dogs? So what started out as just maybe an interest, these algorithms tend to push us further and further and further to the extremes. All the while, right? I wasn't born, a radical, right? An anti-dog radical, right? I was made a radical by this series of behavioral pushes that the algorithms have been doing, all with the intent of keeping me on the platform. And as I was on the platform watching these videos, they are selling advertising and making money.
Yeah, and the example that you just used, and it was a light example, I think we can all laugh at it, but the fact is this is exactly what is happening with respect to algorithms and the information they're collecting. And Charlie, you and I have done a number of talks on this, and the digital blueprint they create on all of us, on individual consumers, and how then they use that information to further influence us and to further influence our next behavior, not only predict, but to influence behavior. Exactly. So the question brings me directly to Joel. Joel, being, the influencer you are in industry, what is the industry's response to mitigate the misuse of technology? So how could we enforce ethical algorithms? Are they enforceable laws in the United States that allow for that? Or are tools like Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act impeding meaningful enforcement against the misuse of technology?
I think that's more than one question. And there's a lot in there. So first, I'm going to start with just by going sort of extending what Charlie was saying. And I'll address the algorithms. An algorithm to me is a very specific tool for a purpose. It's custom designed to get you from a place very rapidly, from point A to point B. To me, it's like, I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I think it's like hyperdrive, right? It's like, if you're gonna jump to light speed, they always talk about, well, we better make sure we have all of our calculations correct. And that's kind of the care that needs to be taken with an algorithm, because otherwise you're going to end up in a place you weren't anticipating, right? You might run into an asteroid field, etc. So I think the most important thing for somebody who's not a tech person to understand is that an algorithm is an intensely focused, powerful tool that will sort of not relent in its drive to get to where it's going. So it's just important that they're aimed in the right direction. To the question of the sector's response to mitigating, I think I need to split this into a couple different categories. You got big tech, you got small tech, which is where I kind of come from. And the only way that I can almost relate to big tech is one of the reasons I even got into tech in the first place was because it had this very Wild West appeal, right? It's like, if you think about the historical context of the Wild West and the gold rush and expansion and all of that, you have this potential for great change. And that's what technology has been for so long in the past 20 years. And I feel like the analogy is playful, but it's applicable because in tech right now, bad actors and bad actions, or I should say controversial actions, are handled by each town, who has their own sheriff and their own deputy. It's kind of like justice is administered on a case-by-case basis. Each company does their best to communicate and agree on how they're going to handle that. It gets more complicated for big tech because there's shareholders and stakeholders and this direct capitalistic gain, but they still are setting their own rules, right? You think about content moderation and the free speech that would be implied in the Section 230 stuff. Twitter, when they moderate hate speech and things like that most people don't know there are algorithms certainly at work there, but the majority of their moderation is still human driven. And that's where ethics really starts to get into this, right? Maybe I'll sort of speak to small tech, and then move into the ethics, I suppose. But the small tech is in a place where we're small little shops. We're known for being nimble and agile. We move wherever around the obstacles. We have a whole way of processing things that we call blockers, and we problem solve around them, and we keep on moving. The issues that sort of guide and direct our ethics from a legislative standpoint are always, that's not where the pressure is actually coming from, if that makes sense. So oh boy, I'm all over the place, but the impact of something like 230 being repealed, which is 230 is essentially a piece of legislation that immunizes websites from the legal liability of the comments of their users, right? So most recently, okay, of course, President Trump was, banned from Twitter. This puts 230 directly in the headlines. That's what that's all about. So right now, big tech in particular is moving towards transparency as an answer. They want to simply explain their algorithms and hope that that is the saving grace for the legislation changes that are being called for. And the reason for that is because movies, documentaries like The Social Dilemma are already explaining how those algorithms work. So like their big secrets are already out. So in my opinion, they're just essentially saying, all right, well, if the secret's out, if we can't beat them, let's join them. And that way they get to keep as much of their IP in place as possible. That's the big tech. Small tech, we don't have to worry about those things. What we need to worry about is what happened leading up to the election, where we had, Russian hackers sort of involved in the election. And everybody was saying, wow, it's incredible how little hacking there is this election versus the last one. And what they realized is that it was quieter and more surreptitious. And there was an article in the New York Times. Actually, I'll just put it in chat here for people to see at some point. Back in early January. And like for me as a small business owner, as I read this, it scared the crap out of me. Not because of potentially being in violation of some sort of piece of legislation that my company might be concerned about. That's not it. What I'm worried about is the fact that, oh, wow, it would be very easy for a lead to be generated, come through my sales pipeline, for my team to be activated and work on a piece of software that actually creates a backdoor into one of my clients' pieces of technology, which would then have dramatic implications. We're a custom software development shop at Industrial Resolution. So we solve custom problems. People come to us and say, I need to get around this obstacle. Can you get me there? And we set about doing that. So my programmers are constantly, they're constantly weighing out the same sort of Twitter moderator's dilemma. Is this hate speech? Is this not? Should it stay? Should it go? The programmer always has to define and say whether this solving this problem in this way is responsible and ethical, and how do we do that? And again, back to that the single like link between big tech and small, it's a case by case basis, and it's through communication with our teams and that these things are resolved. Our ethics policy at our company, it's sad to say, matures only as fast as the threat of legal action or the risk of somebody scrutinizing. Like, I wouldn't want my company to end up in a New York Times article saying that we enabled some backdoor. That fear of bad PR helps our ethics policy mature, because we're a small business. If I actually want to take an active interest in making sure that our focus is set, that our Lightspeed hyperdrive is set in an ethical direction, we have to have those conversations as a team. And it's best done by equipping the individuals doing the work. I believe that's true at a big picture level with big tech. I think it's true at a small tech company as well. But so I think that there's a lot of words there, and I'm not sure if it's all, coming across. You had a lot of questions, so you got a lot of answers. But yeah, how's that going?
No, and that's actually very good. And I think you highlighted what makes it such a, it's a difficult topic to compartmentalize, because you identified it by calling it the Wild West. Technology, if you think about it, before the mid 90s, right? People really had not been using, even though the internet was in existence, the way we use it now. I mean, this is just in the last 30 years. And so it's a technology that is so still new, is still growing, and all we can see as consumers is one little silo, and there is so much more that is going on. And I think you mentioned FireEye as the cybersecurity firm.
Yeah, right.
And you know what is really interesting? I was discussing this with my security class today, that my students notice that the surreptitious nature of these algorithms, right? Sometimes, you know, so it's happening in the background and then it hits when it is meant to. So in a way, it makes all of us seem, you know, we become unaware, or we forget that there are these threats that are constantly in existence. Yeah, so you hit upon so many points, and but I think the Wild West really captures it. All right. So what I'm going to do is just, Joel, did you want to say something else?
I wanted to try and bookend an important thing, and that is, it's about the ethics and the responsibility on the person, you know, the people doing the work. I think that the issue when you get into the algorithm and making ethical algorithms is I think you said in your question, how do we enforce ethical algorithms? And that's what makes this very sticky, because enforcement is it's almost the cause and effect of who gets to say what is ethical, right? And it's a freedom of speech issue that is really tricky. And I don't know of any way. I've heard a lot from Ira Glasser, the ACLU, the former director of the ACLU, and on this. And he, at the end of the day, it's his opinion, and it's become mine. Is you simply have to accept this burden and have these difficult discussions and bear out from the fruit of that what is the right choice in those moments. Because the minute we actually create a ethical code, it's almost as powerful as the algorithm, in a sense, where people stop thinking critically about, is this ethical or not? It's just, well, the code says it's ethical. And so because it said, then you run into this is the same problem as pointing the algorithm in the wrong direction. So that's why, until somebody gives me a better solution than hashing it out as a team, letting the person responsible for the production feel the weight of that, you know, that thing, that I don't know how to create an ethical guideline for my company. And I certainly don't want to inject it into Q2's objectives like some sort of an unanswerable argument. Nothing will get done. We'll just talk ourselves like, you know, silly sort of thing. And for a business that needs to make money to survive, it's not practical.
No.
Can I jump in there just really quick with one important
thing? Please do.
If I could. So Joel, I think you hit on something that's incredibly important. It really comes down to the people that are building and designing these systems.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a really, you know, this is predominantly, I think, for the audience out there, there's a very famous example of an AI system that was discussed several years ago, that it was a system that was built to do facial recognition. It was a facial recognition technology system. And a researcher at, I believe it was MIT, she discovered that these systems were unable, no matter what she did, they would not see her face, right? She tried and tried in different combinations and didn't see her face. Well, what she uncovered is that these AI systems, these facial systems, simply could not see black faces. They fell down. They were blind to her face. Well, what was happening there? Well, it wasn't because the engineers got together, you know, over a series of, you know, their coffee their coffee and bagel, right, and sitting around saying, yeah, we're just going to completely throw out black faces from our system. What happened there is the team essentially was blind. They had an inherent bias, right? They weren't testing their code. You know, again,
there were no black people on their team.
Diversity of the planet, right? You know, so I think your point is incredibly salient here, that we need to make sure we're embedding these lenses into our design. I think, Steve, you wanted to jump in as well.
Yeah, and that's the place where I'm going to respectfully disagree, Joel. I don't think it's about, I think I do hear about having the right team, and we understand that diverse teams, like patent citations are almost doubled, the return on investment is almost tripled. We understand in addition that like Samsung exploding phones might not have happened had there not been such a homogenous group with groupthink. Like I recognize like having a diverse team helps to insulate you. But I think in addition to that, we understand like the trappings as far as developing like an oppressive system, a racist system, an oppressive algorithm. Like that's something any of us can do with the best intentions. The difference, I think, is being responsive. As much as we're talking about enforcing, I think part of it is in part of the fundamental education and awareness in our instruction that we make people aware of these systems of bias that exist in all of our systems and then how to respond to them. As Charlie's saying, part of that is bringing the lived experiences, the voices of your clients, of a broader base of team. It is looking at your data and your outcome, engaging in that feedback, and then being fearless to then rework your product or your systems to meet the needs that are going to be less oppressive.
So Steve, you actually allow both Steve, Charlie, and Joel, you are bringing me to the next question I'd like us to address. So, but ultimately, let's also recognize, with all what the three of you said, ultimately is coming down to the individual, the user. And so this question is in particular both to Steve and Charlie, and I can start with Steve. Should digital literature or critical thinking or social justice or the social awareness of what is out there, should these be necessary pieces in our public school curriculum? Are there any initiatives to aid this progress? Are there barriers in the primary education system, right? So do we not need to integrate all of these understanding, this language, this conversation into our primary education so that it becomes a part of who we are? And Steve or Charlie?
The answer is yes. I think really when we saw Pennsylvania's adoptions of the CSTA standards, we see that cyber ethics is a core component of that, including digital literacy. What I really like talking about, and really what I think Joel brought up, and I know that Nasli had resonated with you, was kind of that Wild West metaphor. Because again, like what we're talking about in the Wild West, like yes, there was venturing, there was discovery, but there was also a replication of very oppressive systems at the same time. Like people fled to the West for freedom from the Confederacy, and the Confederacy spread into the West so that they could have freedom to expand at the same time. That's why Oregon had their anti-Black laws, and there weren't allowed to be Black settlers in Oregon. Like the replication of systems are not homogenous and not based truly rooted on values. What we understand is oppressive systems are resilient, adaptive, and can spread as well. And so again, like we were talking about before, those responsiveness pieces are essential. Understanding, again, the practice, the literacy, understanding when things don't align and what those other language and tools are and recognizing it are very important. And then in addition to that, what we see emerging particularly is an ongoing conversation is like, what is the history? Not just the civics as far as how we engage, but are we able to understand historic systems of oppression so that we can recognize them as we potentially might replicate them in the future? These become some of the most powerful lessons so that we can empower students to, again, have a better liberated experience in their education. And really, if we go back to it, more importantly than that is what we understand is we talked a lot as far as our education system being a segregated system. What we understand is in many ways our education is a pre-professional system. Our students learn different practices so that they can go into higher education so that they can gain employment in the future. And we understand those pipelines and systems are heavily segregated as well, both with opportunity and exposure when it comes to teaching staff and the language and support that we provide for our students, including the areas of computer science, which I know is a place that Nasli and I intersect with often. So when we understand that education has that pipeline system, in addition to that, we understand there are going to be holes in the pipeline going up into the professional experience as well. So if we really want to empower our students to navigate this world of work in the 21st century, not only to make the products of the future, regardless of whether they're oppressive or not, but in addition to that, to make sure that they're making just products and viable products, we need to also provide fundamentally education when it comes to historic oppression as well.
Thank you. And so really, you were diving really deep into our interconnected world. It's interesting because technology, as we all know, it doesn't just exist and it's not just sort of floating and once in a while we intersect with it. Technology is integrated with society and as it exists right now, and technology is going at a certain pace and society is at a certain pace. And so Charlie, I was wondering if you, and I know that you work in the Penn Manor School District, the director of technology, my kids are in the Penn Manor School District. I wonder, is the Penn Manor School District doing anything to address digital literacy as well, to create our next generation of smart users?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just want to also echo much of what Steve said. This is a multi-dimensional problem that really requires, this isn't, we're not going to tech our way out of this problem at all. We're not going to tech our way out of this problem. Really, it takes an entire system of community to approach this. It's really challenging because schools have never been organized and optimized to respond to these questions. They've never been organized and optimized to deal with misinformation at scale. We haven't been organized and optimized to deal with systemic bias, right? Coming at us, by way of a digital fire hose, that is the internet. Humans in general are just not, education is not geared up to really handle, it's kind of like, when we look at the supercomputer, the planet-sized supercomputer that is the internet and all of that information coming at us, it's kind of like our teachers are showing up to the bicycle race with a bicycle, and the internet supercomputer is bringing a rocket ship, right? It's really not a fair race whatsoever. But there are things that we can do. There's things that we are doing. We have been over the past couple of years reviewing, our computing efforts, our computing programs at all levels across the district. I'll just give one, what I think is impactful example of that. We've recently launched 2 new computer science courses at Penn Manor High School. One actually that both specifically address artificial intelligence, not only from the programming aspect, right, of how are these systems physically engineered and built and what do they do, but also taking a deeper dive in the content around what are these systems doing, right? How are we eliminating bias, right? What were the systems, what is the intent, right? What is the designer's intent? Has there been a 360-degree view of the system and its impact on individuals? And how do we get to that? Through examples such as, we know that AI, here's the thing. Do we really believe that all artificial intelligence software systems are going to make better, more unbiased decisions than humans? Well, we know that that's not necessarily the case. If you look at AI systems that are being used to predict recidivism, we discover that it's not fair, right? You know what I mean? There are ethical biases in those systems. So these are the types of conversations that we're embedding into our new courses, because quite frankly, it's these philosophical, ethical discussions that our kids need to be hearing at an early age so they can start to weigh and wrestle and consider this before they even write a line of code.
Just pivoting off that for 5 seconds, some great resources expanding what Charlie's talking about. Algorithms of Oppression by Noble and Weapons of Math Destruction by O'Neill are really great and conversational reads. They are quick to pick up.
Yeah, second that. Absolutely.
Any educators out there for some of the educational pathways piece when we talk about technology, Stuck in the Shallow End is a book that I would highly recommend.
Great, and maybe we can find a way to link these books when this recorded webinar is sent out. I think that would be important. So again, what we're bringing into play is really critical thinking, right? But not just critical thinking in the traditional sense of let's do some math, but critical thinking in terms of math algorithms with respect to the world as it is, with respect to history and certain designs and traditions. All right. So there is so much, right? And you know what I would really love to do is just have you all over and just keep talking about this. But I'm going to stick to one other question that I know is very related, and we can come back to this topic in just a bit. And this question is to both Joel and to Charlie. So Tim Berners-Lee, who is the father of the web, introduced a new platform, Solid, as an answer to the misuse of the web. Solid gives a greater and richer choices for users and developers to create better web standards. And then there are the likes of Tristan Harris, some of you have heard of him, who asserts that all human minds can be hijacked and the choices they make are not as free as they think they are, right? And what Tristan did is he left Google to form the Center of Humane Technology, which strives to support tech corporations to integrate privacy and ethics into their core values. So my question is, we have these technologies and these philosophies, but we have these technologies available to us. So why are more companies and consumers not adopting these platforms with higher ideals? And again, I know the answer is just, there is not just one answer, but as a point of discussion.
Do you mind if I jump in, Charlie?
Sure, go ahead.
I think actually, I mean, we sort of have been answering this without saying it like succinctly, but I don't think that anything we're dealing with right now is a new problem. These are all problems as a human race we've faced throughout history. It's the accelerated power, that light speed of technology. Charlie was saying that teachers show up with a bicycle against, it's the speed that makes it so difficult to have that present communication that Stephen was saying is necessary, right? To be able to respond. And the tech sector is so new and so wild, so gold rushy. It's just hard to stay current. And I do believe that we will make progress with this in time. I just think we're kind of in the we're writing the Declaration of Independence phase, not the writing the First Amendment phase. We're trying to get there, but that's like the transitional period that we're in. Like we're actively writing it. But when you talk about why aren't we adopting it? I just asked, well, why isn't Industrial Resolution adopting? Why aren't we using solid yet? Why aren't we leveraging some of the materials from Center for Humane? Part of it's awareness. Part of it is, again, we're building the ship as we're flying. Like, the Center for Humane Research is literally, or not humane research, what's it called again? The humane technologists. They have a course that they're developing, right? That they're launching Q1 2021, the fundamentals of humane technology. And we at IndieRes we set up, every one of our employees gets, a dedicated amount of, training and betterment time each month. I can't wait to sign up for that. But the reality is it doesn't exist yet. That's where we're at in tech. And so my answer is that it moves so fast. It's hard to, we're in the industry and I can't keep up. And so it takes things like this, conversations, to Stephen's point, to, thank you for, and Nazla, thanks for organizing this. It takes conversations like this to make that a top of mind thing for an entrepreneur like myself, saying, that would be a great use of professional development funds in the next quarter. So I think it really is just frustratingly comes down to we don't have the time. But I do think we're getting better.
Changing this system is obviously not simple, but I think our best shot is, I say this probably in every single chance I get. It's about education. I think it is about helping our students think critically and deeply about the systems that they use, the systems that are using them, and understanding or developing an empathy that is connected to technology, right? Every system is going to have winners and losers. And I think the key is getting our kids to understand who's designing it, how is it designed, was it designed for all, who benefits? Again, these are philosophical, ethical conversations that are uncomfortable for teachers. They're uncomfortable for parents. They're uncomfortable for students. But if we're going to make serious change, if we're going to dent this, we need to get comfortable with those really hard conversations about the nature of these systems. And again, it's before we write a line of code. It's before we put together a business plan, right? It's thinking about, is this system doing more good than harm? Right? It's thinking about who's being harmed along the way with this system, and talking with students and saying, do you want to support what is essentially an extraction economy? Because really that's what it is. It's an extraction economy.
Just to jump in here, just
Go ahead, Steve, please.
The one part is the nature of systems is to not change. That's why systems are designed. And so I think like the one part that I would respectfully disagree is I think there's a lot of power in education. Education is a key component, but I think much more so, I think there is a key component in addition to that to complement that, which is somewhere in the belief in the area of like political will or commitment to change systems. And that's going to be, again, exerting the time, effort, and energy to competing systems, mitigating systems, or to dismantle existing systems when we understand the outcomes could be oppressive in some way. And that's going to be, again, having scrutiny as far as the outcomes, looking at the data, engaging and understand data is not just the metrics as far as dividends and stockholders, but also as far as the impact, and then really weighing that as far as the values for us moving forward.
Can we just keep going?
We do double dutch now.
Sorry about my dog. I think my dog's barking. So this is like the core of the issue, and I see in one of the questions answered here is similar. It's about how do we establish a regulatory body, right? That can get after that. And the problem is the same that has existed around freedom of speech forever. Like, who gets to enforce that? And history has shown time and time again that whoever gets to enforce that, it's only a matter of time until the policies and legislation that is put together ends up being used against the people who put it together for a certain reason, right? Well, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the specific example. I think there was an act early on in the in Congress. I think it was during the Adams presidency, where they literally instituted, I can't remember the name of it, but a policy where if you could not speak badly about the president, if you published anything about that, they essentially shut down newspapers and things that were publishing inflammatory statements and things like that. We see where that goes.
Third act of Hamilton, just in case everyone's wondering.
Thank you. Leave it to the educator thank you. I need you. But so you see where that goes. If you go too far in the direction of enforcing a code of ethics, and all of that. For instance, if right now, if big tech is moving towards transparency as the answer to some of these complex issues, it's not going to be too long before we bump into the other bumper of free speech, which is crucial, the right to anonymity, to write something under a pen name, to be able to do that. I mean, I think it was a Supreme Court case, I wrote this one down so I wouldn't screw it up. McIntyre versus Ohio Elections Commission. The quote that came from the justice that anonymity is a shield from the tyranny of the majority. And there will be times when, just because everybody agrees that this is the ethics of the day, that this is ethically right, it does not necessarily mean that that is just or fair. I'm trying to stay away from right or wrong. You know what I mean? But we'll bump into the other guardrail before too long. And that's kind of where I'm not saying it as a non-starter. I don't want to not have the conversation. I do. I think we should slog through it. I think that's what the democratic process is all about. I would get wary of, for instance, Biden said I voted for Biden, but the idea, he portrayed, it seems like the one thing Republicans and Democrats have agreed upon over the last 12 years has been increased federal regulation of the internet, increased influence exertion, the ability to exert influence over the internet and what it can do. And, and specifically to Section 230, and how that's coming under fire. In November, Biden was saying that he's very open to the ability for, people to sue companies for the content that they allow to exist on their website. Well, it's the same thing as what was the Hamilton Act? Is that it, Stephen?
No,
it's the same.
Hamilton writing a burn letter about John Adams was the impetus of that.
Got it. Well, it's sort of getting there again. You know what I mean? Where if you if my company has to consider what we build for, one of our clients may end up getting us sued based off of, because we support and hope, maintain that website. We're going to be really hard. It's going to be really scary. Most of our expenses become legal fees. Our expenses become a PR team. You know what I mean? Where we stop being able to do what we're actually existing to do and start having to defend our every move. It just gets tricky. Is the picture I'm trying to paint.
It does. And I think the definition of what is a publisher, I think that's the thing. I think even with politicians, this topic, as we have just discovered, is so interconnected and pervasive and invasive and touches us in every aspect of life, right? So what is a publisher? I think we'd have to go ahead and redefine that or define that and talk about that, especially with respect to 230. And sometimes just listening to some of the arguments, I wonder to myself, I wonder if they really understand the definition of publishing with respect to the web and web applications.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we are short on time, so I did want to say one thing here, which is that this topic is one that lends itself to discussion that is enlightening, that makes us have even more questions than the questions we just started off with. But under those circumstances, I'm so glad that the influences in industry and education and decision makers are people like my friends, experts, Joel, Charlie, and Steve. And I know that I'm being asked to conclude, so I do want to say thank you to the three of you for a meaningful and insightful discussion that has given us more questions to think about, but that is so timely and so important. And I know that at this time, I need to turn the baton back to Dr. Rice or Ms. Landis and open up any channels for any additional questions.
Yes, thank you so much again to all of you for being here to facilitate this conversation. I am just going to talk about a few more logistics. I am sending a survey link to everyone if you want to just give us a little bit of feedback on this event. We host webinar events throughout the year, so we just want to make sure that we are catering to your needs and what you want to hear. And then I'm also going to send out the link to our Facebook page. Once this event, we end this meeting, the video will be posted directly automatically to Facebook. So if you want to watch this video, if you want to tell a friend to watch this video, that's where it'll be. And then kind of like Dr. Hardy said, we will collect some of the resources and links that were mentioned in today's webinar, and we'll send that out in a follow-up email as well. So thank you all again for coming. We also have some more in the chat, but we'll collect that for you. And that's really all we have. Go out, you can spread some of the knowledge that you learned today and start some fun conversations with those around you.
Socially distance, please.
Yes. Start conversation on the phone or something. Yes, thank you. Goodbye to all.
Thank you.